get started, I'm just going to tell you guys a little bit about my story and how I found Darren in the first place. If you guys have questions as we go along, please just pop them in the comment box, and I'm going to we'll either answer your questions as we go, or we'll allocate some time at the end as well if you've got any specific questions. So a little bit about my story. Some of you already know this, a lot of you don't, but I was diagnosed with cancer 2.5 years ago, and it was a really aggressive cancer. So to give you an idea of how quickly it was growing, when I had my ultrasound, it was about 2 by 3 by 5 centimeters. And in the period of about 4 to 5 weeks, it had grown to a size that was bigger, that my tumor was bigger than the size of a fist. My initial diagnosis was it's at least stage 3, but we expect there's going to be tumors throughout your entire body. So it's probably going to be, a lot worse than that. And what I did from that, obviously that's a really shocking diagnosis. And what I did from that point is I just went crazy researching. So I was talking to healing, doctors and naturopaths and clinics and healers and everything I could find all over the world. So I was talking to people in Sri Lanka, in Australia, in Germany, in Mexico, literally every cancer center in the world. And I knew straight away that I wanted to treat this naturally. I didn't ever want to get pushed down a path of, chemotherapy or radiation or anything like that. And I guess, it's stuff that I had looked into before getting diagnosed. Like I had a background in wellness, and, I'd watched a lot of documentaries and stuff around pharmaceuticals and the cancer industry. So I knew for me that I didn't want to push down a path that wasn't right for me. One of the people I reached out to was a coach that I had done some training with, MJB seminars in Perth. And I reached out to the head trainer and I said, is there any way I can coach with you? I've just been given this cancer diagnosis. And he said, this isn't really my field, but I recommend you talk to Darren Hay. And he gave me Darren's phone number. And I think, my initial conversation with Darren went for about 3 hours, and I just knew 100% everything he said was in total alignment with the way I felt I wanted to treat myself. So I'm going to hand over to Darren now. So Darren, I just want to say thank you so much for being here and welcome.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So welcome. It's so exciting to come together and do this because we worked so closely for, quite a few months, and anybody that knows me knows how grateful I am for Darren and how supportive he was throughout my whole journey. So for that, I'm really, really grateful. So Darren, I'm going to ask, how did you initially find your fully raw path, and what put you on that path?
Well, firstly, I'd just like to qualify that I don't currently live fully raw. Like I'm not 100% raw, but I cycle from 100% raw food living, to high raw, basically, because I find that's what feels the best within me. But I discovered that path through my own journey of healing. What happened for me, once I left uni, I basically dropped out of a chemical engineering degree because I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life, I felt. And so I actually got into training the body, and I engaged with a fairly serious Japanese combat art and started to train my body in that sense, and started to learn more about the human body. And from there, I migrated into the Army, the Australian military. I was actually in Australian intelligence, serving in an infantry battalion. And so my life was very much centered around very intense physical training. And it was during my time in the Army that I had a very serious motorcycle accident, where I basically, I went through the rear window of a stationary vehicle, at somewhere between 80 to 100 kilometers an hour, ended up in the back of the car and smashed myself up pretty bad, and had to learn how to walk again. And it was in rehabilitating myself from that injury where I learned a lot about my body. But It was the stress of that injury, the stress of my physical training regime, because I pushed myself a lot. I was very unforgiving on my body. I had body consciousness issues, really. And so I wanted to always be bigger and stronger and faster. And so I was very unforgiving on my body, and couple that with the stress of the accident, where I had to rehabilitate myself and learn how to walk again. And I had a bit of a party lifestyle. All of that led to a sharp deterioration in health, only just maybe a couple of years after the accident. And all of a sudden I found I couldn't sleep properly. I'd be lying awake for hours at night with a lot of stress in my system. I couldn't eat. My digestive system was basically packing it in, you might say. It was just losing power. I was losing digestive power, and I couldn't eat the quantity of food that I needed to eat. And I had problems with digestion. I had problems with pain in my body. I had problems with massive detoxification, elimination out through the skin. So, big pimples, you might say, which is just an elimination through the skin. So my body was becoming overloaded and toxic. And I just went about looking for help and assistance with all of that. And I was chronically fatigued. I was looking for help and assistance with that. And pretty much everyone who I spoke to wanted to give me things to try and fix the problem. And I kind of felt like, I'd been at the hands of the pharmaceutical paradigm all my life for various things. And I felt like that at some point my body was operating fine. It was doing the right thing. It was capable of doing all the things that I asked of it. I never had these problems before. And all of a sudden, now I had these problems. So I kind of felt, well, there was a reason why these problems arose. It was just common sense to me. There was a reason why I was having these problems in my body. And if I could find out what those reasons are, then I can change what I'm doing. Stop giving the body the reason for behaving the way it was. And by finding that cause, if I change it, my body should get well again. It was just common sense to me. And so to me, to take pharmaceuticals to help move my digestion, or to take care of, what was, body acne, and all that type of stuff, it didn't make sense to me, because a lack of pharmaceuticals wasn't the cause of those problems. And so I just started to look a little bit more deeply, and through serendipity, you might say, or synchronicity, I discovered the teachings of natural hygiene. And looking for a teacher, I found one in Australia, in fact, in Cairns, up in the Atherton Tablelands, or on the edge of the Atherton Tablelands there, just above Cairns. My mentor in natural healing, Dr. John Fielder, who was a teacher in natural hygiene, nature cure, and biogenics. And the essence of those disciplines was that the body is self-healing when you provide to it the forces and materials that it needs in balance to survive and to thrive, and to remove from it those aspects which are creating harm, and that quite naturally it returns a balance again, because as a living being, our body is self-organizing, which means it brings itself back into order when the right conditions are applied to it or given to it. And so you don't have to think very hard, really, to discover what those conditions are if you just observe nature. And so the whole principle of these teachings, or these disciplines, was based around natural law and the natural laws for health. And part of that was eating raw. And so, I was very resistant to eating raw at first, mainly because it meant that I had to lose all this muscle tissue that I was pridefully trying to build. And it meant having to let go of all of that. And so I had to face had to heal aspects not only of my body, but of my psyche and my emotional world to allow myself to go through that healing. And eventually when my body just said, look, I'm not going to accept anything else. You know, you have to follow this path if you're going to heal the things that are going on with you. Eventually when I surrendered to it, you know, I discovered after some serious detoxification and some rebuilding that raw food is one of the, to me, definitely a prime factor in getting your body well again. I'm not saying you necessarily have to eat it 100% full time for the rest of your life, because it depends on a lot of conditions. But as far as healing from degenerative disease, and as far as detoxification is concerned, and as far as being a major component of your diet, I think it's I don't think there's many things better than it, for various reasons which we can go into.
Yeah, Darren, thanks so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate that, because I think, you know, it just really opens it up to a lot of people. And I know that's one thing we talk a lot about as well in some of the wellness workshops I run. And it's, you know, often we see these signs and symptoms and we ignore them, and then we're hit with something bigger. You know, in my case, it was cancer. In your case, it was a car accident. And this was our wake-up call. And you know I lived a life that was so busy and so full on, and you know, lived off little sleep and always go, 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 and working multiple jobs and just spreading myself anywhere. Like, and I had so many signs and symptoms going on in my body for years that I was completely ignoring. And, you know, I'd been told I'd had adrenal fatigue on 3 different occasions, and that wasn't enough. I just kept pushing and keep pushing. And then, you know, the result for me was cancer. So I think, you know, it's really important that we do start to take those little signs and symptoms seriously and start addressing that before it does turn into something bigger. So guys, we're going to delve more into the raw food soon, but I just want to ask, I know one of the very first things Darren said to me, you know, in our initial conversations was you need to get on vitamin C therapy. Like that was one of the things he, you know, really pushed for straight away. And it was quite hard to find because it's not really a common thing. Most doctors' surgeries don't have it. And I, you know, looked around quite a bit, and I did find a surgery in Perth that was administering this vitamin C therapy. So I went and saw the doctor there, and he put me on like a vitamin C IV, and I did that once a week for about 8 weeks, I think it was. So Darren, do you just want to talk a little bit more about that? Like, why was that vitamin C intervene so important?
Well, there's plenty of information on the internet, you know, for people to go and look at and pull up studies if they want the technical information, but I can break it down into a nutshell. And 2 reasons. I mean, a lot of people underestimate the value of vitamin C in the diet. You know, vitamin C is water soluble, and it comes basically in plant foods that are full of water. So they have a high water content, you know, and fresh plant foods. We don't synthesize it. There are most creatures on the earth synthesize it for themselves. We're one of the few that don't. So we have to get it through our diet. And basically it comes in fruits and vegetables, and you'll get a little bit in meat if the meat is fresh. But because it's water soluble, once you cook a food, you take out the living water and you lose the vitamin C. So it's highly underrated, and yet it's very, very important. One of the reasons is that it goes a long way it's basically your anti-poisoning antioxidant. It goes a long way to help detoxify poisons and acid wastes from your tissue structures. And cancer is a disease of acidity or hyperacidity. So it helps you detox a lot of those acid wastes and a lot of those poisons that feed mutagenesis in cells. And as a general antioxidant, it actually picks up the energy level in cellular interactions, because it imparts energy into those interactions as an antioxidant. It is a electron donor. I have that right. And so the other thing is that cancer cells, by their very nature, live by means of anaerobic glycolysis. So they eat carbohydrates anaerobically. So they don't, cancer cells aren't aerobic. So they don't make energy using oxygen. They make it, they use a fermentation process, which is why they produce a lot of acid waste as a byproduct, because the byproduct of anaerobic glycolysis is lactic acid. And so they create an acid environment. They live in an acid environment, and they make the body more and more acidic. And as the body becomes more acidic, the tissues start to degenerate. They can't function properly anymore. So cancer basically loves sugar because that's how it creates energy for the cells to live and thrive. And vitamin C is actually synthesized from carbohydrate. That's how we make our, the vitamin C that you buy in stores has been synthesized from carbohydrate. There's just a few chemical steps to make carbohydrate, to make vitamin C out of glucose. So a lot of it just comes from cane sugar, modified. And so because it's very similar in nature to a carbohydrate, the cancer cells just pull that in. And at high enough levels, not only does it, not only is vitamin C itself, destructive to cancer cells, but at definitely high levels, it basically causes apoptosis in cancer cells. So it causes cancer cells to self-destruct. So it helps the body detox, and it helps cancer cells destroy themselves. So vitamin C therapy is highly rated when dealing with cancer.
Yeah, and it can be, I did notice in my journey, it can be quite hard to find as well. I know, in other countries you can, easily get it at hospitals and stuff like that. But in Australia, it was very hard to find. And I did find there are a couple of clinics in Melbourne I found, and there was one around the Byron Bay region. And I did end up finding one in Perth, but I really did have to sort of dig for that. So vitamin C, that was one of the first things for me to get on. And then the main thing that we're here to talk about and that I went on was a fully raw food vegan diet. So people ask me questions all the time. Can you have this? Can you have that? And things like, can you have raw fish? Can you have raw eggs? It's like, no. It's 100% raw vegan diet. And so that meant I could eat, unlimited raw fruits and vegetables. So any raw fruits and vegetables. I could eat raw nuts, so uncooked, unsalted nuts, seeds, and I could have, coconut oil or olive oil. And that was, that was it. That was my diet. So, it was a massive change for me. And, I'm going to talk about, I've just forgotten the name of a healing crisis. So my body went through a series of healing crises. And so one of the things was, I started the full raw vegan diet the day I got out of hospital. So I was out of hospital, and then that was it. I just 100% implemented it. And for 4 months, a thing did not go into my body that wasn't 100, raw vegan. Like, I was so committed to it. And I think for me, if I went off a little bit, I was scared I would go all off. So I was, really, really stringent with it and stuck to it. And there was a whole series of, okay, Monique just asked, what about vinegar? So yes, I could have apple cider vinegar. So when I come out of hospital, I went on this raw food diet. It was such a shock to my body. And I started fainting all the time. Like I was so weak, and, I would go to stand up and I would fall over. I remember there were a couple of occasions where I'd get out of bed and I'd just completely pass out. So that was one of the symptoms. And then the other one was, it was about 8 weeks into being fully raw. And Darren had already talked to me about these healing crises and what were some of the things that could happen in the body. And so it was about 8 weeks, and I broke out in the most horrific rash from head to toe. Like, I've still got photos if anybody wants to see them, but my entire skin was bubbled with this thick rash. It was itching like crazy, and it was literally head to toe. My eyes were so puffy and red and rash because everything was covered. And I remember ringing Darren, and I was like, Darren, I've just got this, my body is covered in this rash. It was painful. And his response was like, this is awesome. And I'm like, no, this is not awesome. He's like, this is so good because this tells me that you're doing it properly. So, and this was my first healing crisis. And Darren said to me, this is great. Very likely this is going to happen again in another few weeks, around 12 weeks, but it will be less severe. And sure enough, this is exactly what happened. So Darren, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like, what was my body going through at that time? And like, what is a healing crisis? Why does that happen from raw food?
Okay, there's a lot of different things or elements to try and fit in there. We'll do our best. A healing crisis, there's a difference between a healing crisis and a disease crisis. So cancer is a disease crisis. So that is when all the warning signs have been ignored up until that point. And the body, the life force of the body acts in our benefit always. If the life force of our body wasn't acting in our benefit, then we would be dead. So every moment, every second of every moment of every day, the life force is working to keep us alive and to keep us healthy and to restore homeostasis or balance in the organism, which is our body. And so our ignorance usually acts to take it out of balance. And then the life force of our body is basically fighting against our ignorance continuously and trying to bring our body back into balance. And when the ego, our egoic nature, our desire nature, pushes the balance of the body out too far and we aren't paying attention to the warning signs, we get a disease crisis, which is ultimately a dysfunction in the tissues and a breaking down of tissue function and structure because we haven't allowed our bodies to, our body to perform the natural regenerative and restorative tasks that it needs to perform every day to keep us healthy and well.
Yeah. And
so a disease crisis can occur in any tissue complex within our body, and depending on where it's located and the type of tissues it's affecting and the type of affect, or effect that it's working with, medicine gives it a different name, a Latin name. But it all basically stems from imbalance. It's like once you understand how the body works and its code, these things aren't a mystery anymore. So a healing crisis, what happens with a healing crisis is when you recognize that your body is out of balance, and then understanding certain principles that the life energy needs in order to effect healing, and understanding certain principles that a cell needs in order to thrive. When you give that to your body, the body starts to go about its task of balancing. So the first thing it has to do, the first thing that usually happens is you get an abatement of the symptoms of this disease crisis. So the worst symptoms tend to abate as the body is allowed to catch up on the work that it wasn't allowed to do before. And it starts to move materials around the body, some that are for the benefit of the body for the detoxification process, and some which are part of the breakdown process. So the toxification process has led to deposits of either metabolic wastes or the wastes of the wrong foodstuffs and all these types of things that have built up in the tissues of the body because we're not allowing the organs of elimination to work properly, or they're not working properly, or we've overloaded the body in some way. We've given the body the wrong things. We're not getting enough nutrients in, such as vitamin C and what have you. And so this nutrient, in order to keep the tissue structures functioning, or this waste product, I should say, and toxins, in order to keep the tissue tissues functioning as good as possible, or as well as possible, it has to kind of like take them away. And so it drops them either out of circulation and stratifies them in certain tissue beds, which are, you know, considered to be or deemed to be less critical, or it pushes it into the fluid, you know, the fatty fluid, you know, the fat tissues of our bodies, and dilutes it with a lot of fluid. So we can get these acid crystalates that get dropped through tissue beds, and they can become irritants and create inflammation and pain. So, you know, your type of myalgias and stuff like that. Or we can become quite fluidy and puffy, and we start to get pressure on different complexes and what have you. So as we allow the body to bring ourselves back into balance, it's got to move these materials somewhere. And it'll try the organs of elimination first, but sometimes, you know, you can't fit a square peg in a round hole. So if the types of compounds that we've taken in can't be channeled through the normal organs of elimination, if we don't have the enzymic capacity to break those down naturally and pass those through those channels, we have to modify them and push them out through other channels. One of those channels is the skin. I mean, the skin is the body's largest organ of detoxification, actually. And so especially when the liver is overloaded, the skin will take up the next, you know, the skin is the next port of call, really, once the liver has really been overloaded. And that can happen through healing as well, just the natural healing process. And so a healing crisis is the body coming back into balance. So whereas a disease crisis tends to, it's a downward slope towards fatal termination in the end. I mean, if you didn't take, you know, your cancer, you know, your health, you know, grab the bull by the horns and run with it. And so a lot of your success had to do with your mindset, because you had a never fail, never fail mindset. So a disease crisis ends in fatal termination, which is where cancer ends, if you don't, you know, have a strong mindset and face up to it and deal with it. A healing crisis, its tendency is towards regeneration, because it is the natural action of the body to balance the imbalance which was created through our ignorance and our ignorance of signs that life was giving us to, you know, to pull up on those reins. You know, healing crises can take many, many different forms. And coming out through the skin like that is just one of the forms that they can take, but they are toxins basically being pushed out through our largest organ of elimination, which is the skin. And on the other side of that, your body is cleaner, far more functional, and you'll find that your mental clarity is greater, your senses are heightened, because your nerve system complexes are now functioning with less interrupt, with less obfuscation.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, because I know one of the things that, you know, I heard this comment so many times, and, you know, from the outside, I look really healthy. Do you know what? Like, I always exercised a lot. I ate really healthy, what I thought was healthy. And, you know, so many people made the comment, like, how on earth did this happen to you? Like, you know, you're so healthy. And it's like, yeah, you can like look really healthy and you can go to the gym and you can eat healthy, but there is all these other layers as well. Like, you know, just the makeup that we put on our skins, the chemicals that go into our bodies, the chemicals we use in our household, the contraceptive pill, all this stuff that we've been putting in our body for 15, 20, 30, 40 years. It's all that stuff as well. And then there's the whole other level of, you know, holding on to stuff and, you know, how you process emotion and all of that sort of stuff as well. And I know, you know, we dug into that stuff quite deeply as well. And so just going on that from talking about the senses. So I remember in one of my very first calls with Darren, I told him, like, so, you know, we went through my whole health history, and I said, you know, I don't have a sense of smell. And, you know, I'd not had a sense of smell since birth. Like, I can never remember having a sense of smell. occasionally, every now and then, like every few years, I might smell a bit of something, but generally I can't smell. And Darren said to me, without batting an eyelid, you'll get your smell back. And I was just like, I've had no smell my entire life, Darren, but you know, we'll see. And I will never, ever forget this moment. It was about, I think it was around 10 to 12 weeks of fully raw. And I was filling up my car with petrol and I smelled this disgusting, horrible smell. I was like, what is that? And then I was like, hang on, I can smell. Like, it was so crazy and exciting and weird. And then for the next couple of weeks, I could just smell everything. And I can, you know, remember being in this store and I was getting this, like, buying this natural moisturizer, and there was 2 flavors. And I was like, you know, normally I just pick the pretty packet or something, and or the name of it sounds good. And I was smelling these 2 different things. I was like, this is mind blowing. And I think of everything I experienced through my raw journey, that was just, for me, mind blowing. I remember being in Bali, and you know what Asia's like, there's smells, and just being able to smell all these things for the very first time in my life was so exciting. So Darren, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like, how does that happen? How did I get my smell back when I've not had it my entire life?
Well, the body is a unit, a complete unit. You know, we tend to think that the finger is different to the thumb, you know, and different to the big toe, and the elbow is different to the knee, and all that type of stuff. But it's all just one unity. It's one organism. So there's, you know, the figure keeps changing, but anywhere from somewhere between 10 trillion to 100 trillion human cells, maybe 10 trillion human cells and 90 trillion bacterial cells. But even those bacteria are a part of our ecosystem. And then there's fungi, and there's parasites, and there's the virome. The body is a complete ecosystem of human cells and microbial cells. And so the health of any part of that ecosystem basically translates into health of the entire ecosystem. And the more you can bring all of those areas back into balance, the better the whole system is functioning. And so it's kind of like, because the body is a complete unit, if you can improve the activity and general functioning of the body, then any part that's out of balance, any part that is dysfunctioning, can bring itself back into alignment, and therefore into proper natural physiological function, because our body is designed to smell. It's naturally designed to smell. We have that sense. So everything is able to heal, provided life is in it.
Yeah.
You know, everything is able to heal. And the more life that is present, the greater the capacity to heal. So just knowing that the nervous system is quite sensitive and is easy to overload. I mean, it's sensitive, yes, and it is easy to overload, but it's also highly resilient. So that's a double-edged sword, because due to its resiliency, we poison it, we overload it, and you know, we overload it and we overload it. And it's because of that resiliency that we can get away with so much. But what we don't understand is how much we also sacrifice as a result of that, how much sensitivity we actually sacrifice, because we prefer to be numb in many ways, not feeling. You know, a lot of people think that the opposite, you know, a lot of people want pleasure, but they spend their time numbing themselves because they don't want pain. So they numb the pain, and they could be using painkillers, or they could be using alcohol, or they could be using coffee, or they could be using anything. But what they don't realize, that the more pain you numb, the more pleasure you numb at the same time. The opposite of pain isn't pleasure, it's numbness. And so as you allow yourself to, when you start to listen to the life force, you actually have to start to feel again. And allowing yourself to feel is allowing yourself to stay present to how the life force is moving through you. And it's in presence, when you start paying attention to that, that you can actually start giving to your life force, which is your own spirit force, the things that it needs in order to allow your body to thrive. And so it's just natural that your nervous system starts to become more sensitive, particularly as you start to allow the mental, emotional, and physiological complexes that block the natural flow of life force that led to your condition. You know, when you start to remove those blocks, that energy starts to move again. You know, those pathways start to open up again. So it's quite natural for that to happen. Not only that, our bodies in today's day and age, with the types of foods that are so readily available to us, which are high fat, you know, low cooked fat, fried foods.
Not even food.
Yeah, not even foods. Fried, not even foods. Yeah, non-foods. Foodless foods, I call them. You know, devoid of minerals that, you know, and electrolytes that would, you know, be part of the signaling, you know, signal induction process in our bodies. Very little light. The light has been expressed out of them through the processing, and very little electrical activity. All of that has been expressed and lost through the processing. You know, so, and the living water has been taken, and the living water contains the means really to provide the substrate for life. And then we have a lot of processed sugars, heaps and heaps of processed sugars in a lot of the things that we eat. We're addicted to sugar and we're addicted to fat. We normally take them together in the same meal. And this creates an environment for fungal overgrowth. And almost everyone, practically everyone bar none, has some form of fungal overgrowth in their body. And the older you get, the worse it gets. And it compromises the sensitive tissue structures first. And a lot of these are actually in the skull. In the skull and in these tight pockets, tight areas of our body. And when you allow your body to detox and you go onto a diet which allows those regrowths to simply just die back, because we're no longer feeding them the types of foods that they really allows them to thrive. As they die back, your nerve complexes and your nerve pathways regenerate and they come alive again. And you start to feel and you start to sense through those pathways again, which have been, for all intents and purposes, overtaken by a foreign organism for so long that you've forgotten what it's like to have normal, healthy function through those pathways. And as they heal, they come alive again, because that's the nature of life. That's what life does. And life will always do that, provided it has a pathway. And so, yeah, it's common sense to me when you work with the body enough, especially with your own body, and when you study it enough and you put all the pieces together, it's this majestic kaleidoscope of geometry and patterning and law, you know, spiritual law, sacred law, natural law, that it becomes obvious.
Yeah, and I think you've kind of covered a little bit of my next point as well, but you know, I had so many mind-blowing experiences through this raw foods journey, and another one was how strong my intuition became. Like, you know, we are all really intuitive. We're all born intuitive. And, you know, I think through everything you're talking about, through toxins, through overload, through stress, all the stuff we put onto the body, it blocks our intuition. And one of the things I found through my raw food journey was how much this was unblocking and how intuitive I become. And one of the examples was this, you know, I remember just my mental clarity was so crystal clear, more than I'd ever experienced before. And I know for me, I really noticed, you know, if I'm on a really healthy diet, my you know, my mind is really sharp, and the second I start introducing rubbish, it's not so sharp anymore. But this was, you know, a whole nother level. And one of the, again, something you said to me at the very start was, because, you know, I'd completely cut out meat and I'd always eaten a lot of meat. And you said when your body needs it, you will know it will come to you in a dream. And again, I was like, okay, we'll see how this goes. And sure enough, this dream was so vivid and clear. It was more than a dream. And, you know, I remember it so clearly still to this day. And I was working as a personal trainer in a gym. And I remember sneaking into the fridge, and everybody had, there was this massive bowl of red meat, of like sausages and steak and, like, you know, I don't even eat a lot of red meat. And I just remember sneaking in there. And it was like I'd stolen everybody's food. I had this massive stainless steel bowl, and I just sat there eating this red meat. And then, so I was like, okay, here's a dream. Another thing you said, which was completely accurate, rang Darren. I was like, I've had this dream. And he's like, okay, it's time to introduce me. And I think, you know, that day you said you can go and I could have some fish and some eggs. So it was okay for me to introduce some eggs and some fish. I remember I went to the store and I bought like a fillet of fish and some smoked salmon, and I couldn't wait. On the drive home, I was like, just started eating the fish, the salmon on the drive home. It was like really exciting. But do you want to talk a little bit more about that, Darren? Like just that connection to my dream, and how you were just so certain that's the way it was going to pan out, and that's exactly what happened.
So I mean, it's natural for our senses to heighten as I said, as we remove the poisoning factors that suppress nervous activity or otherwise distract the body into dealing with those poisons. As we change that in the body, there is greater capacity for our, you know, the natural intelligence and awareness of our bodies, you know, of our minds, of our spirit nature, to become aware of information that it wasn't otherwise aware of, because we do a lot of numbing with food. So you have to remember that we are a multi-dimensional being, in the sense that we're not just a physical organism. You know, we have a feeling nature, and we have a thinking nature, and, you know, we even have a spiritual nature. You know, and without getting into the definitions of all of those, you know, that's what I mean when I say that we're multidimensional. And so the healing isn't just about changing your diet. There's many different factors to allow your body to come into physiological alignment. And that includes having a look at the contents, you know, of consciousness, of our own consciousness. So our mental thoughts, and the emotional drivers that we have, and the feelings that lie behind all that, which are trying to communicate to us the truth, really the truth within us. But our belief systems, you know, which can be quite insidious, and the emotional drivers attached to them, cause us to act in a certain way, which reflects or impacts the physiologies of our body. So we have to have a look at all of those, and it's like you can work from the top down, or you can work from the bottom up. So you can work from the mental space of consciousness, and because as above, so below, as within, so without. If you understand the patterns in natural law that really allow us to exist, you know, that's the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, as within, so without. So as in spirit, so in matter, as in mind, so in body. The mind and body are equivalent. There's actually no separation between mind and body, particularly if you understand Einstein's equivalency principle, E equals mc squared, which simply denotes how much energy is required to give the illusion of mass. Mass being matter, and matter being the physical body, and energy basically being the wave functions of consciousness. But the more you drill down into that, the more you'll find that if you can work at a deep enough level of your mind, your body will actually change how it is behaving and how it is expressing itself. But if you can't penetrate past the certain your ceilings or the barriers in consciousness that you have, which is quite common, we can actually come from the other end and work from the body. And as you work on the energy substrate of the body, because all matter is basically energy transformed, if you work on changing that, you're going to get a corresponding change in consciousness. And what happens is, as you stop numbing the physical body, you actually stop the suppression of the contents of consciousness that is leading you to behave in a certain way, which is causing your body to reflect back to you the aspects of consciousness which you are blind to, or which you are unconscious of. So the body just reflects back to you what you are unconscious to, so that you may become conscious and transform it. So as you stop numbing, as you come back onto a natural diet, which in accordance with natural law, the body wants real foods, whole foods, foods from nature as they appear in nature, as much as possible, to the degree that we can live that ideal lifestyle. And so there's many reasons why that is optimal for us. But as you remove the aspects of your diet, which is incongruent, which is poisoning the body, which is suppressing feeling and various other things, all of those contents start to rise to the surface for your transmutation. And as you do that, as you naturally do that, as you come across the limitations of your belief systems, as you come across emotions that you're buried and you transform them, you become a clear vessel, or a clearer vessel. And what's actually happening is that if you understand the esoterics of your subtle body anatomy, your physical body, your vital body, your emotional body, and your mental body is moving into an alignment. So you start to have this clear conduit. It's called becoming congruent to your higher self, or your spiritual nature, which is your true self. The soul part of you, which has invested itself into your physical body as a vehicle for expression and experience and growing here. You know, that alignment becomes more powerful and more clear. And so naturally your intuition starts to heighten. But the subconscious, which is basically the domain of life, the domain of life force, and very much a valid part of you, and also the realm of spirit. I mean, life force is a spiritual force. It's our power. You can very clearly see the difference between someone who is living and the corpse, you know, when life force has just recently departed. And so there's something incredibly spiritual there. And so the life force is the messages and the conversation really of your own deepest spirit, you know, through the body to you, about what it is that your body needs and wants in any particular moment. And it's always communicating that. It's always trying to communicate that. But you have to learn to speak its language, which means you have to spend time getting to know it like you do a good friend, and understanding the language in which it is speaking. But it will speak to you easily through images. And so the subconscious will speak to you in images, most easily in a dream state. And I know this because it was taught to me through my mentor, who told me to look out for these signs. And, you know, I promote a plant-based diet, low fat, high raw to 100% raw, but high raw plant-based diet, where if your body wants animal product, then it'll tell you, and then to give it animal product. I mean, you'll be a fool not to give your body animal product if it wants it. So give it what it asks for. And you're also foolish to give it something that it doesn't want, because it only has to work harder to get rid of it, right? If you accept people's trash that you don't want, then you got to get rid of that trash. You got to spend the energy, you got to spend time getting rid of it. So listen to your body. Your body's going to tell you what it needs. And my mentor told me to look out for it. And I had a couple of powerful experiences myself. You know, one where I was asked to eat, I've had two where I was asked to eat meat, and I've had one where I was asked to eat cheese, which I made from raw dairy in an effort to stay raw. And I've eaten raw meat, and but I've eaten it in a certain way. It's not like I just grabbed a big steak and just hoed down on it. You know, I sliced it very thinly and I mixed it in with a salad. And the thing is, when your body wants it, it tastes amazing. It tastes delicious. And the next day I could feel a marked difference in my brain chemistry. And it wasn't that there was anything bad before. It was just that the next day, something phenomenal had happened. And like I felt over the moon. But that was it. You know, I didn't need any more from that point, at that particular point in time. So there's a lot of factors that will determine when your body wants it, and if it ever wants it. It depends on the individual, depends on where they are, depends on what type of process the body is undergoing. It depends on the quality of the food that they have access to. It depends on the climate that they're living in. There are many, many different factors that determine what a body needs and what your body might need, which is why I don't like to give out set diet plans for people, because everyone's body is different. Everyone's nature is different. Everyone is going through a different process in a different part of the world, in a different climate, in a different season, with different soil qualities, with different access to different types of foods. And so I don't really say, this is what you must eat. I give guidelines, and then I encourage the person and work with them to help them uncover their own life intelligence and how it speaks to them, so that they learn what it is their body is asking them, and to learn how to read the signs and pay attention to those messages of life within them, so that they can start to select the diet that is best for them. Really.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna we've got some questions coming through, and guys, just keep sending your questions through, because we are going to get to them all at the end. But just to sort of flow on from that a little bit, a question that has come through is, you know, how long do you need to be fully raw? So say, you know, for example, what's the sort of minimum you would do to get through those healing crises and whatever you need to start to heal the body?
Well, that's going to depend on what needs to be healed. And it's going to depend on how old the person is. The younger you are, the faster your body is going to heal. And it also depends on how deep the complex, you know, how deep the incongruence is. If it's a simple surface level incongruence, you know, and you're a young individual, then you can heal something relatively quickly, you know, 2 weeks, you know, maybe less, maybe out to a month. But if you have something that's quite deep seated, that it's been with you for a while and it's quite chronic, and you're pushing, you know, several decades, you know, you're above 40, you're even above 50, it's going to take some longer work, because you have to consider that you've been building the imbalance for quite some time. And so you can't just annul imbalance overnight. You know, not working at the grosser levels. If you had the spiritual capacity to work at a far higher level of the subtle bodies, you can transform the physical body purely by an act of will. But very few people have that capacity. You know, they're ordained healers, mystics, people like that who can work at that level. But for us, our greatest learning is to understand the law of cause and effect, and how we have created these conditions, not only in the way that we have behaved, but through the emotional contents and the mental contents that have caused us to behave in this way. And to understand the causal relationships behind those, and to correct those. And through correcting, witnessing within ourselves, you know, cause and effect in action. And witnessing the fact that the life force is our friend and working for us. And if we can bring our desire nature under control and bring it into service of our spirit nature, that, you know, we naturally heal and life will heal us. And so it's going to take us longer, the longer it's been going on for. And if something is quite intractable, it's usually because there is something in our consciousness. So there's a content in consciousness which we aren't aware of, which we aren't accessing, which we have some barrier in place to finding. And the person has to be willing to go there, but they have to be willing to find that truth, which is why, you know, when I start coaching with people, one of the mental prerequisites to healing that I impress upon people is that you have to be willing to be in truth. You have to be willing to know, to seek out and find what it is in your own consciousness that has provided the kernel or the nucleus for the creation of that condition. Like, you have to want to know what it is. You have to be willing to see it, whatever it is, because when you see it and when you shine the light of awareness on it, it loses its power and you start to move that energy complex, right? And when you move that energy complex, it no longer has the power to create that condition. And so it starts to dissolve, it starts to break up. But you have to want to see it. You have to want to go there, which means you also have to be willing to feel, because the movement of life force energy brings with it feeling. The natural movement of life force energy grants to us feeling, and it grants to us pleasure, right? The natural flow of life force energy in balance is pleasurable, and the more in balance, the greater the pleasure. And so our capacity to feel that pleasure is our willingness to be in truth, and our capacity to know, you know, or to be realized, self-realized in that sense. One of the aspects of self-realization is the capacity to feel pleasure, which is why I say the opposite of pain isn't pleasure. It's actually numbness, because it's through numbness or it's through pain that we oscillate in coming into congruence, right? And as we come into congruence, we become centered, and the free flow of life force, you know, in that space is pleasurable. It's what the yogis call ananda, which is bliss. So yeah, you have to be willing to feel. You have to be willing to go there, and that's scary for a lot of people. It is scary. I mean, everyone, and on all of our journeys of healing, you know, at some point you've got to face those feelings you aren't prepared to face, or you've kept buried. And you can get there, and it's not as terrifying when you get there as you thought it was going to be, but we build it up in our minds, and we have very clever blocks in place to try and stop us from going there, and ways of distorting and deflecting and all those types of things. And so it's you know, it can take a bit of skill sometimes in uncovering what those are, but the person has to be willing to go there themselves. You can't take someone there. You can take them to the threshold, but they've got to step across it. So, and not everyone can do that.
Yeah, and I really love that, Darren, because I think, you know, I know since I've been on this journey, people reach out to me all the time, and you know, how do you do it? What is it? And it's like, it's not just, you know, people go on a 4-week candida cleanse, or, you know, a 4-week some sort of diet. It's like, you've got to be so committed to the process, and you've got to be willing to dig deep. And I remember that was something you used to say to me all the time, is it's like kind of delving deeper, and sometimes you resist this stuff, and it's like you need to be willing to see your light as well as your dark, and, you know, discovering maybe those things you don't like about yourself and bringing that to the surface, and going through this whole like, it really is a transformative process when you are committed to it. So I think, thanks for touching on that a lot, because I think that is something, you know, people are considering doing fully raw, that it is it's an incredible journey, but you've definitely got to be committed. You can't sort of go half in. It's like you've got to be fully committed.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that a lot of people focus on the diet. I mean, the diet is such a key part of it, but it's not the diet itself. It's it's how that diet changes your relationship to the life force energy. It's the relationship of eating natural foods to the life force energy, and how it allows the life force energy to move through you, that is healing, or that it provides the platform or provides a space for healing to take place. Because if you could do the same thing through consciousness alone, then the truth is you could actually eat the most atrocious things and you'd probably be okay. But it's because people's consciousness isn't that clear, and they can't see the wood for the trees, that you have to come back to basics. And I mean, I'm not saying that, you know, someone who's highly conscious, you'd find, eats natural foods anyway, because of the normal harmonic relationship those foods have to their senses and to their natural bodies. You'll find they naturally gravitate to those anyway. But at the same time, they won't completely flip out and lose it if they don't have access to those foods. They'll just choose the foods which are most appropriate in the time and balance everything out, you know, eat moderately and balance everything out when they can.
Keep sending your questions through. I've got a couple that's come up that I'm just going to jump onto now. So one of them was about the vitamin C, Darren, and can you overdose on the vitamin C?
Well, a lot of studies have been done on this, and basically you can't overdose on vitamin C in any way that's dangerous. Your body will flush out excess through your urine, and or you'll get diarrhea. So at the point you start getting diarrhea, you just back off on the vitamin C, because it's water soluble, so it goes through your body very quickly. Your fat soluble vitamins you can overdose on because they lodge up in the fat cells and fatty tissues, but not water soluble. Your body just gets rid of it, flushes it very quickly. So for that reason, unless you're taking a hero dose, you know, for therapeutic means, you know, say intravenously, if you're going to take a supplement, you're probably best off having about 1,000 milligrams every, say, 7 hours or so. And spacing your intake out like that. So when you first get up midday and then before you go to bed, have about 1,000 milligrams, and you'll keep your body optimally topped up. If you can't get that much, it's okay. Any vitamin C you give for yourself or give to yourself is better than nothing, because most people don't get enough in their diet. The 100 milligram thereabout recommended dietary guideline is basically just enough to, you know, stave off, you know, scurvy and symptoms of deficiency. We need a lot more than that, particularly with the types of diets that we're and the types of physiochemical stresses that we're encountering in our life. So we need more than that. I think 3,000 milligrams. If you're giving yourself 3,000 milligrams a day, you know, you're going to be doing very well.
Okay, cool. And the other thing I want to touch on, Darren, as well, is I know part of my protocol was sunbathing. So I just been given this cancer diagnosis that, you know, it's melanoma, which essentially is skin cancer from spending too much time in the sun. And then I start talking to my coach. He's like, right, part of your protocol is to get out in the sun every day and sunbathe. And I was like, oh, do you know what I mean? I've just been told I've got this cancer from spending too much time in the sun. And so I sunbathed for half an hour every day, naked if I could, or as close to it as I could. So do you just want to talk a little bit more about that and the vitamin D and how essential that is in part of our healing?
Yeah. So when I was being trained in natural healing by my mentor, I mean, part of that was actually researching and investigating the accounts of a lot of the natural healing doctors of the past few centuries and even earlier. And the regimes that they used to put people through, to allow people to heal. So, and sunbathing was a very important part of that. And I was always told not to underestimate the value of the sun when it came to healing. It can be the difference between someone healing a chronic condition or not. There's many reasons for that. Not the least being the fact that it improves circulation up to the surface level of your skin, and your skin is your largest organ of detoxification. So much so that if you could varnish your skin and seal it with a non-toxic varnish, so it wasn't a varnish that was, it wasn't the toxicity of the varnish that was killing you, but if you just sealed your skin up with a varnish so your skin couldn't breathe, you'd be dead in 3 hours. So sunbathing allows circulation to come up to the surface level of the skin, and greater detoxification to happen. The infrared rays of the sun reaches deeper into your cells and allows detoxification to happen, which is why people go and do infrared saunas. But the sun has infrared rays, and so it allows detoxification to happen through the skin and allows circulation. That naturally feels good too. It feels nice being kissed by the sun. So it does a lot for your own sense of well-being and your own mental, emotional well-being. And that psychologically goes a long way into promoting health and healing, because it just feels good. And it feels deeply good. It's not like, having a lick of an ice cream cone, which gives you this superficial feeling of pleasure. It's a deep pleasure that you feel in your body as your body is drinking in these radiations. Now, yes, you can have too much sun. So we say sunbathing, not sun baking. We're not burning. If you burn, then you are wasting vital energies in the necessary reparative process of the skin, rather than using those vital energies in healing the condition that you're dealing with. So it's very important that you understand what your limits are and don't exceed those, because you're going to be doing yourself harm rather than doing yourself benefit. So circulation to the skin, detoxification through the sun. It's also been known through studies that the sun, through its action, natural action, it lowers blood pressure, it lowers blood sugars, it lowers cholesterol in the bloodstream, increases insulin sensitivity for that reason, and a number of other things. But it's through the action of the UVB spectrum. The sun's also naturally antimicrobial and antifungal. So it's like a natural sterilizing agent over your body, and to help to keep your ecosystem in balance. All creatures are naturally exposed to the sun. They have their protecting mechanisms and protecting factors, which we, through our civilization, have lost to a large degree, which is why we have to mitigate it to some extent. It's natural to be out in the sun. We're born in our birthday suit. It's natural to be exposed to the elements, but also to protect ourselves as we need it. So, but in order to produce vitamin D, we need certain wavelengths of the natural, sunlight spectrum. So there's certain wavelengths in the UVB spectrum which we need. Those wavelengths are absorbed through our skin, and taking a precursor to cholesterol is converted into vitamin D. So vitamin D is actually a steroid hormone that then goes into the bloodstream, takes those light frequencies, goes to the liver, goes through another transformation process. Certain light frequencies, certain photons are given off to the liver to nourish the liver. It then goes through the bloodstream again to the kidneys, and where it undergoes another transformation. And again, photons, certain light frequencies are given off to the kidneys to nourish the kidneys. And it becomes its most active form then, and then enters the circulation again and goes to various levels of the areas of the body to nourish those bodies and to give off those frequencies of light to the areas of the body that need it. And so studies have been done to show that vitamin D is, I can't remember now whether it was 70% effective against most cancers or effective against 70% of cancers. I'd have to look that up again, but it was powerfully effective against cancer, powerfully anti-cancerous, anti-mutagenic, and supports so many different areas of our body, particularly the lungs, the respiratory tract, the thyroid, but the reproductive organs, and many different parts of our body are protected by vitamin D. And so many elements of our bodies are chromophores. So a chromophore is a structure that absorbs light frequencies, light energies, and taking in that light energy is used in part of its function, because it's energy. It uses that energy, those certain frequencies of light, those energy frequencies, in its operation. And so hemoglobin is a chromophore because it has a very similar structure to, say, chlorophyll, almost exactly the same, except hemoglobin has an iron atom in its center and chlorophyll has a magnesium atom in its center. They're both chromophores. They both absorb light. They're designed to absorb light frequencies. The pigment cells through your skin, all pigments are chromophores. Different elements in your body are chromophores, and the carotenes, the chromophores, are designed to take in light frequencies because those light frequencies are used in the operation of those compounds and in those structures. And when a structure which has the currency of light flowing through it, which is an electron, is charged by a photon of light, that electron can now do far more than it could ever do before it was charged with that photon of light. Its capacity to perform work and the types of work that it can perform has now been increased greatly than to what it was before it received that photon of light, before it was charged. And Albert Szent-Györgyi, the Nobel Prize winner who discovered vitamin C, he wrote a lot about this stuff in his work, Bioenergetics. Light, we need light. We're light beings. We are charged from the inside by light, right, from the subtle planes, and we are charged from the outside by the physical plane. And you can even see this reflected in our physiology, the fact that the germplasm, as we are just a tiny little embryo, and the germplasm splits into three different parts: the esoderm, the endoderm, or the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. And the ectoderm is the part of the germplasm that differentiate and forms the integumentary system, so our skin, and the nervous system, the cerebrospinal system, the central nervous system of our bodies. So the resonance in that ectoderm is the same resonance that goes through, in our skin. So our skin is formed of the same germplasm, as well as our central nervous system. And they're both, the resonance of that cell line, is such that it is powered and absorbed and communicates through light frequencies. So, we have the outer external sun, soul, and we have our inner spiritual sun, the fire of life. Both of those suns are meant to be contacted, and the light from those suns are part of the light of our beings. We are light beings. So yeah, don't underestimate the power of the sun and the power of light to effect healing and change within you. That was quite deep. They got quite deep, a bit esoteric, but
But Darren does that. There's so much information in there, and sometimes it just comes out. So I've got a couple of questions here, Darren. One is, I take 6,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day for a chronic viral infection. Would a raw food diet help me?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you'd have to drill down then into what are viruses really. And I know there's a lot of controversy out there. But, you know, for me, a virus isn't a threat. A virus is just a signal from nature and the nature within you that there is something out of balance. And so the virus isn't the problem. It's the imbalance that's the problem. The virus shows up due to the imbalance. And so all you got to do is find where the imbalance is and restore balance. And whatever that condition is, it will correct itself. And if it's physiochemical, physiological, far easier. If it's mental, emotional, it's a little bit harder to find and deal with. But again, it depends on the readiness of the individual. And if it's karmic, well, that's even harder again. But everything's within the realm of possibility.
Yeah, and I really love that point because, you know, especially with everything that's going on around us now, and I'm not going to go into it too much because I know we will be here for the rest of the day, but you know, there's so much focus on the moment of this virus and shutting down the world and social distancing and stuff. And you know, what we need to be focusing on is our own immunity, our own health. And you know, I think it's just such a perfect opportunity for people to take that on. And you know, we're all reaching out for this what is it, a vaccine and this sort of stuff, but like for all of us, if we're really healthy, then we're so less susceptible to these diseases or viruses and stuff anyway. So I'm going to jump onto Tara's question. So I've got an infrared sauna. Does the heat from the sauna also help with the healing through detoxing, sweating? I love the sun. My emotions are lowered with less sun, winter and cold.
Is it a normal sauna? Was that a normal sauna or an infrared sauna?
Infrared sauna.
Yeah. I mean, it's the infrared spectrum that actually allows the detoxification to happen there. Studies have been done with a normal sauna. With a normal sauna, you will detox a little bit, but not as much as an infrared sauna, and not as much as actually exercise. Exercise, you'll do more detoxification from exercise because you're stirring things up from deeply within the cellular machinery and passing those wastes out of the cell than you will from just going and sitting in a sauna. But an infrared sauna is different. You'll detox more with an infrared sauna than you will with a standard sauna. Will you detox more in an infrared sauna than from exercise? I would doubt it. But if you combine the two, you'd be doing pretty good. But if I could just choose one, if I could exercise, I'd do exercise, because not only with exercise are you detoxing, but you're improving circulation, you're improving oxygenation of your tissues, you're creating a nutrient uptake demand, you are creating a need for adaptation in your physiology of your body, so you're strengthening it. There's all sorts of benefits from exercise. But if you couldn't, and the only means you had was an infrared sauna, then you know, you can certainly take advantage of that. But you can use an infrared sauna. I mean, they're great.
We don't have any more questions coming through, but Darren, was there anything else specifically that you wanted to touch on that you think people should know if they are considering a fully raw journey?
Yes. It's difficult initially when you start out on a raw food journey to get enough in. I mean, a lot of people, you really have to be prepared to surrender the wants of the ego, because the ego comes in with its own ideas, its own agendas, and how it wants things to go. But the ego has been living separate from the laws of life and separate from the wisdom of life for a long time. And it doesn't know actually what the life force needs or what it's trying to communicate and what it wants. And so quite often what happens is the egoic nature or desires and wants are running antithetically or antithetical to the needs of the life force. And so there's going to be a conflict, and there's going to, and fear is going to arise because people want, they're afraid of what the body might be saying. They don't know what the body is saying. They don't know what the life force is saying. They don't trust it, that we've been conditioned not to trust life, to fear life even. I mean, to the point that we're fearing this virus when the virus isn't the problem. We have no need to fear a virus. Life is not against us, right? Nothing, no infection can take hold of you if the anchor point doesn't exist within you. And so, and that anchor can exist mentally, emotionally, and physiologically, and usually both. So we've been conditioned to fear life and to not trust it, when in fact, all the time, it's actually working for our benefit. It's working to keep us alive, because if it wasn't doing that, we wouldn't last another second if it wasn't working for us, and yet we live for years, we live for decades. Some people even make over a century. And often that is, even though we've been challenging the life force most days and working against it. So it's an interesting journey where you have to confront your fears, where you have to learn how to surrender to greater degrees in order to encounter that living wisdom in your body. And so you have to let go of your egoic desires initially. But once you do that, once you start to transform the foundation of your body, you'll come back stronger and more capable and wiser than you were before, and hopefully a little bit more intuitive if you've actually done the work and started to really listen. But it's initially, it's going to be difficult to get in enough food. That's going to be a struggle. How to feed yourself enough, and or how to just surrender to the process and allow the body to do what it needs to do, and being able to run with it, and being able to learn what that language is of the body. But once you do that, you'll come back so much wiser and healthier and more fearless.
Yeah, and I know that's something I experienced, especially at the start. And it's like when all of, I used to eat a lot of protein because I'd been trained by a naturopath to eat protein often. So I was eating 5, 6, 7 times a day and constantly eating protein, and, being a really high energetic person and exercising a lot and just feeling I had to fuel my body all the times. And then all of a sudden I've gone from this to eating fruits and vegetables, and it was such a shock for my body. And I remember, trying to get in enough calories every day was really, really hard. And it's like, you've got to totally re-educate yourself. But for me, it was just, the whole journey was incredible, and I just learned so much. And obviously you guys can see from talking to Darren, like, you are seriously the most intelligent person I've ever met. The amount of information you hold up there blows my mind every time. That I'm like, I've got to get you to come on and share this with everyone. So thank you so much for joining us. It's such an honor to have you here. I've learned so much again, as always. So that's pretty much it. Lots of thank yous coming through. Guys, thanks so much for joining us. If you don't catch this live, please hashtag replay and let us know you've watched it. Darren, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, that's all. Thanks, Jo. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Thanks so much for joining us. Have just Darren, what's your website?
DarrenHay.org.
DarrenHay.org. Cool. Awesome. All right, guys, have such a beautiful weekend. Thanks, Darren. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you guys soon. Take care. Thanks, Darren. Bye-bye.